I used to think dreams were just noise, static from a tired brain, fragments of the day stitched together by neurons firing randomly in the dark. That was before the hollow oak changed everything. I thought I knew about consciousness, reality, and the thin membrane that separates what we call real from what we dismiss as imagination. It started on a Tuesday, nothing special about it. Gray, October sky pressing down on Chicago like a weighted blanket. The kind of day that makes you grateful for warm places and strong drinks. I've been going to the Hollow Oak for 3 years, ever since I moved to Lincoln Park. There wasn't much to look at from the outside, just another brick building squeezed between a laundromat and a used bookstore. But inside, it had character. Dark wood that had absorbed decades of stories, brass fixtures that caught the light just right, and a bartender named Mickey who remembered your order and never asked why you looked like hell. That night I ordered my usual bourbon Neton, settled into my regular spot at the end of the bar. The place was nearly empty, just me and a couple in the corner booth speaking in hushed tones. I was halfway through my drink when exhaustion hit me like a freight train. One moment, I was alert. The next, I was fighting to keep my eyes open. The bourbon burned warm in my chest as I decided to call it early. I remember walking to my car. I remember the drive home, the familiar weight of fatigue settling into my bones. I remember falling asleep still wearing my work clothes, face first into the pillow. But then I was back at the Hollow Oak, only it wasn't the Hollow Oak anymore. The same layout, the same bar, the same brass fixtures catching the light, but everything else had transformed. The walls were painted in warm terracotta and deep gold, adorned with vibrant artwork that seemed to pulse with life. Palm fronds swayed gently from somewhere I couldn't see, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and ocean salt. Through the windows, I glimpsed not the familiar Chicago street, but a tropical landscape bathed in perpetual sunset, all orange and pink bleeding into purple sky. Music drifted from invisible speakers, something with a Latin rhythm that made my heart beat differently, made my blood feel lighter. The couple from the corner booth was gone, replaced by people who seemed to belong in this transformed space. A man in a white linen shirt laughed with genuine joy. A woman at a small table sketched in a notebook, her fingers moving with fluid precision. It felt like Brazil, though I'd never been there. Something about the energy, the way the light fell, the casual elegance of the people around me. It was as if the Hollow Oak had been transported to Ipanema or Copacabana, transplanted into a world where beauty was the default setting. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at the far end of the bar. In a spot that shouldn't have existed, the wall, there was solid brick in the real Hollow Oak. But here, it opened into an alcove bathed in golden light. She wore a white dress that moved like water, and her dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders. When she looked up at me, her eyes held depths I couldn't measure. "You're not supposed to be here yet," she said, her voice carrying an accent I couldn't place. Portuguese? Maybe, but with something else underneath. Something older. I found myself walking toward her, though I hadn't decided to move. "Where is here?" She smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "That's the question, isn't it? Where are we? And what makes anywhere real?" I sat down beside her without being invited. The bar stool felt solid, real. The smooth wood grain beneath my fingers had texture, temperature. This is a dream. Is it? She turned to face me fully, and I caught a hint of something in her expression, urgency masked by patience. Because I was just in Chicago, in the actual Hollow Oak. And this, I gestured around us, this isn't Chicago. No, it isn't. She signaled to the bartender, who I now noticed wasn't Mickey, but a young woman with intricate braids and kind eyes. "2 caipirinhas, por favor." The drinks appeared with impossible speed, garnished with lime and radiating the scent of cachaca and sugar. I'd never had a caipirinha, didn't even know what one was supposed to taste like, but somehow I knew this one was perfect. "I need to tell you something," she said, leaning closer. Her skin carried the warmth of sun and sand. "Something important? But not yet. The timing isn't right." "What are you talking about?" She placed her hand over mine, and the contact sent electricity up my arm. "Soon, very soon, I'll find you again, in the waking world, and then we can begin." But she was already fading, or maybe I was. The tropical warmth dissolved, the golden light dimmed, and I felt myself being pulled backward through darkness towards something that felt like falling. I woke up in my bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, with the taste of lime and cachaca lingering on my tongue. For the rest of that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been somewhere real. Not dream real, but actually real. The memory didn't fade the way dreams usually do. Instead, it grew sharper, more detailed. I could still feel the texture of her hand, still hear the exact inflection of her voice when she said my name, though I couldn't remember telling her what it was. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the transformed bar, to her eyes holding secrets I couldn't fathom. By evening, I was desperate to get back to the Hollow Oak, hoping somehow the dream logic would continue, that I'd find her waiting for me. The real Hollow Oak felt diminished by comparison. The brick walls seemed dull, the lighting harsh. Mickey looked at me with concern when I ordered a caipirinha. "Don't carry that one, Ethan. You feeling all right?" I settled for bourbon and tried to make sense of what was happening to me. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through engineering school and a decade of building bridges, it had been just a particularly vivid dream. But the rest of me, the part that had felt her hand on mine, knew better. I was halfway through my drink when she walked in. She wore jeans and a black sweater instead of the flowing white dress, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, but the eyes were the same, those impossible depths that seemed to hold more than one lifetime of secrets. She scanned the room until she found me, then smiled as if we were old friends meeting after a long absence. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, sliding onto the bar stool beside me. My hand trembled as I lifted my glass. "Ethan." "I know." She signaled Mickey for a drink. "Vodka tonic, please. And another bourbon for my friend here." Mickey looked between us with curiosity, but served the drinks without comment. Selene raised her glass to mine. "Two dreams that aren't dreams," she said quietly. I stared at her. "It was you." "In the dream?" "Yes." She took a sip of her drink, never breaking eye contact. "I told you I'd find you in the waking world, though I prefer to think of it as different layers of the same reality." "That's impossible." "Is it you felt it, didn't you? The realness of it. The way everything had weight and substance and consequence." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Some people can step between the layers, Ethan. Move between dreaming and waking, as easily as walking from one room to another. It's rare, but not impossible." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss her as delusional, but the memory of Lime and Kashaka lingered, along with the phantom sensation of her hand on mine. "Why me?" "Because you can see clearly in both worlds. Because you have the ability to carry messages between the layers. And because someone needs your help." "Who?" Selene finished her drink and placed a $20 bill on the bar. "Her name is Althea. You'll meet her in 3 days. In the dreaming world, in Brazil, and when you do, you'll need to deliver a message that could save a life." She stood to leave, then paused. "The dreams will feel more real each time. Ethan, don't fight them. Let yourself go deeper. And remember, what happens in the dreaming world has consequences in the waking one." She walked out into the Chicago night, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the certainty that my life had just taken a turn into territory I didn't understand. The next 3 days passed in a haze of anticipation and dread. I researched lucid dreaming, read about shared consciousness and astral projection, even looked into the possibility that I was having some kind of breakdown. But every rational explanation felt hollow compared to the memory of that transformed bar, the taste of Kashaka, the weight of Selene's hand on mine. I found myself thinking about Brazil. I'd never had any particular interest in South America, but now I was reading about Rio de Janeiro, studying maps of Copacabana and Ipanema, learning about the culture and language. It felt like preparing for a trip, though I had no plans to travel anywhere. On the third night, I went to bed early, almost eager for what was coming. The transition was seamless this time. One moment I was lying in my Chicago bedroom, the next I was standing on a beach in Rio de Janeiro at sunset. The Christ, the Redeemer statue stood watch from Corcovado Mountain, arms outstretched over a city that sparkled like scattered diamonds. The ocean breathed rhythmically against the sand, each wave carrying the whispered promise of secrets about to be revealed. Selene was waiting for me at the water's edge, her white dress moving in the sea breeze. She looked more solid here, more real than she had in the transformed oak. When she smiled, it was tinged with sadness. "You came," she said. "I wasn't sure you would. I don't understand any of this, but I'm here. Understanding comes later. Right now, we need to find Althea." She gestured toward the city rising behind us. "She works for a major consulting firm, has offices in Copacabana, but she's in danger, and the only way to reach her is through the dreaming world." "What kind of danger?" "The worst kind. Someone is going to die if we can't warn her. A child, maybe several children." Selene's expression hardened. "There's a trafficking ring, Ethan. They're moving children from Rio to São Paulo, then to Europe, for organ harvesting." The words hit me like cold water. Jesus Christ. Althea has been investigating them without knowing how deep the corruption goes. How many people are involved? Tomorrow night, she's going to a meeting she thinks is about legitimate business. But it's a trap. They know she's getting close to the truth. Why don't you warn her yourself? I can't reach her the way you can. She's not ... sensitive to the dreaming world. But you are. You can appear to her in her dreams, deliver the message, make sure she understands the danger. I looked out at the ocean, trying to process what she was asking of me. And if I refuse, then a child dies. Maybe more than one. And Althea probably dies too. The weight of it settled on my shoulders like a physical thing. I had never asked for this responsibility, this bizarre ability to step between worlds. But now that I had it, how could I turn away? Where do I find her? Selene pointed toward the city. "Look for the building with the green glass facade, 40 stories high. She'll be there, working late. She always works late when she's on the trail of something big." The journey that followed defied every law of physics and logic I'd ever learned. I walked along the beach, but the distance stretched and contracted like elastic. Sometimes I was moving through crowds of people who seemed to exist in fast forward, their conversations blending into white noise. Other times I was alone on empty sand, with only the sound of waves and my own heartbeat for company. Buildings rose and fell around me like a time-lapse video of urban development. The sun hung suspended in the sky, neither setting nor rising, casting everything in perpetual golden hour light. I passed street musicians whose melodies followed me long after they should have faded. Vendors selling fruits I'd never seen but somehow knew the names of. Children playing games that seemed to involve bending reality itself. At one point I found myself in what looked like a favela, but the buildings were made of crystalline light instead of concrete and corrugated metal. A woman sat on her porch, braiding her daughter's hair, and she looked up at me as I passed. "You're far from home," she said in perfect English, though her lips moved to Portuguese words. "I'm looking for someone. Everyone here is looking for someone. The question is whether you'll recognize them when you find them." I wanted to stop, to ask what she meant, but something pulled me forward. The urgency was growing stronger, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Time was running out, though I couldn't say how I knew. The favela dissolved into a business district, all glass and steel reaching toward an impossible sky. The building Cellini had described stood out like a beacon, 40 stories of green glass that seemed to glow from within. But every time I approached it, it receded, staying just out of reach. Frustration mounted as I tried different approaches. Direct assault failed. The buildings simply moved away. Circling around led to dead ends and streets that looped back on themselves. I even tried closing my eyes and walking forward, hoping dream logic would carry me where conscious effort couldn't. But when I opened them, I was standing in the same spot. That's when I saw the obstacles weren't physical, they were emotional. Every step toward the building brought waves of doubt. What if I was wrong? What if this was just an elaborate delusion, and I was actually lying in a psychiatric hospital somewhere, lost in my own fractured mind? What if Cellini was a figment of my imagination, and I was about to terrorize some innocent woman with paranoid ravings about human trafficking? The Tao was. I found myself sitting on a bench that materialized just when I needed it, watching the green glass buildings shimmer in the distance like a mirage. People walked past me, office workers, tourists, street vendors, but none of them seemed to see me. I was becoming invisible even to myself. But then I remembered Cellini's words. What happens in the dreaming world has consequences in the waking one. If this was real, if any of it was real, then a child's life hung in the balance. And even if it wasn't, even if I was delusional, wasn't it better to try and be wrong than to do nothing and be right? I stood up from the bench and started walking again, this time not toward the building but toward my fear. I let myself feel the doubt, the terror of being wrong, the crushing responsibility of being the only one who could deliver this message. I acknowledged that I might be crazy, that this might destroy my life, that I might wake up tomorrow and find myself committed to a mental institution. And then I walked through it all. The building didn't move this time. The green glass facade rose before me, solid and real, with the kind of detail that only comes from actual observation. I could see individual offices through the windows, the glow of computer screens, the silhouettes of people working late into the night. The lobby was deserted except for a security guard who looked up as I entered. His eyes went wide when he saw me, and he reached for something, a phone, maybe, or an alarm button. But then he blinked, and the expression of recognition faded into confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "I'm looking for Althea, 40th floor." He nodded as if this made perfect sense and waved me toward the elevators. The ride up felt like ascending through layers of consciousness, each floor representing a deeper level of the dreaming world. By the time I reached the 40th floor, the building around me had taken on an ethereal quality, as if constructed from crystallized thought rather than glass and steel. The office was a maze of cubicles and conference rooms, but I found her as she was exactly where Cellini had said she'd be working late, hunched over a computer screen, surrounded by stacks of files and empty coffee cups. She looked to be in her mid, with short dark hair and the kind of intense focus that comes from being on the trail of something important. I approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. In the dreaming world, I realized I could be as real or as insubstantial as I chose to be. Right now, I needed to be real enough to deliver the message, but gentle enough not to terrify her. She looked up, and for a moment her eyes held the same confusion I'd seen in the security guard. Then, something shifted, and she was looking at me with full awareness. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, echoing Cellini's words from that first dream. "I know, but I have a message for you. From someone who calls herself Althea's expression changed, became guarded. "I don't know anyone named Cellini. She knows about your investigation, the trafficking ring you've been tracking. She says you're in danger. Who are you?" Althea stood up, backing away from me. "How did you get in here?" I held up my hands, trying to look non-threatening. "My name is Ethan Walker. I'm from Chicago, and I know this sounds insane, but I'm here in your dream to warn you. Tomorrow night, the meeting you're planning to attend, it's a trap. They know you're getting close to the truth." "What meeting?" But even as she asked, I could see recognition dawning in her eyes. "The one about the charity front, the children's foundation that's supposed to be helping orphans, but is actually." "How do you know about that?" Her voice was sharp now, fully alert. "That information is classified. I haven't shared it with anyone, because I'm here to help. Selene sent me. She says you need to go to Snow Hollow instead. There's a child there who's going to be moved to Europe if you don't intervene. Tonight? Not tomorrow. Althea studied my face for a long moment. This is a dream. Yes. And you're some kind of messenger? I guess so. She laughed. But there was no humor in it. You know what the strangest part is? This feels more real than most of my waking life, and what you're telling me. It fits the pieces I've been trying to put together, the patterns I've been seeing. There is a child, a boy, 8 years old. He was reported missing from his foster home 3 days ago. Then you believe me? I believe something is happening here that I don't understand, and I believe that child is in danger. She moved to her desk, started gathering files. If this is real, if any of this is real, then I need to act on it. Selene said to tell you that you have allies in Snow Hollow. People who've been waiting for someone to connect the dots. Look for Detective Maria Santos. She's been working on similar cases, but didn't know about the European connection. Detective Santos, Althea repeated the name like she was committing it to memory. And the child, his name is Gabriel. He's being held in a warehouse near the port, but you need to move fast. They're planning to transport him tomorrow night. As I spoke the words, I felt the dream beginning to dissolve around me. The office walls became translucent, and I could see the beach in Rio beyond them, the waves still breathing against the sand. Wait, Althea called out. How do I know this is real? How do I know you're not just my subconscious trying to make sense of the investigation? Because tomorrow you'll see a news story about the meeting you were supposed to attend, about what happens when someone else shows up in your place. The dream shattered like glass, and I fell backward through layers of consciousness, through the green light of the building, through the golden hour streets of Rio, through the rhythm of the waves, until I landed hard in my own bed in Chicago. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The taste of salt air lingered in my mouth, and my skin felt warm as if I'd been walking in Brazilian sunshine. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Couldn't reconcile the gray Chicago morning light with the golden perpetual sunset of the dreaming world. But the memory was crystal clear. Every detail of the conversation with Althea, every word of the message I'd delivered. If this was just a dream, it was the most coherent, purposeful dream I'd ever had. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of normal life, while internally counting down the hours. I could find out if any of it had been real. I researched Brazilian news sites, learned enough Portuguese to navigate the headlines, kept my phone closed in case something broke. The first sign came that evening, a small item buried in the international news section of a Chicago Tribune website. Brazilian businesswoman Mrs. Kimi, site security concerns. The article was brief, mentioning only that Althea, a consultant working on charitable foundation oversight, had failed to appear at a scheduled meeting in Rio de Janeiro, stating she had received credible threats to her safety. My hands shook as I read it. She had listened. She had taken the warning seriously. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 3 days, the story exploded across international media. First came reports of a police raid in Snow Hollow, the rescue of a kidnapped child from a warehouse near the port, then the arrest of several suspects connected to an international trafficking ring. Finally, the revelation that connected it all. Testimony from the rescued child had led to evidence of a systematic operation moving children from South America to Europe for organ harvesting. The name at the center of the investigation was Althea. I read every article I could find, watched every news report, followed every development in the case. The details matched everything Selene had told me in the dreaming world. The charity foundation that was actually a front for trafficking. The European connection. The corruption that reached high levels of government and business. But it was the interview with Detective Maria Santos that stopped me cold. She spoke about receiving an anonymous tip that had led her to connect her investigation with similar cases across Brazil. She mentioned working with a consultant named Althea who had suddenly appeared with crucial information at exactly the right moment. It was like she appeared in my dreams, Detective Santos said in accented English during a CNN interview. One day I was working on isolated cases, the next day I had a complete picture of how they were all connected. Some kind of miracle. I turned off the television and sat in silence, processing what I'd witnessed. Either I had stumbled into the most elaborate shared delusion in human history, or I had actually traveled through dreams to deliver a message that saved lives. The rationale part of my mind still rebelled against the impossibility of it all, but the evidence was overwhelming. The rescue of Gabriel, the exposure of the trafficking ring, the international investigation that was now dismantling a network that had operated for years. It had all started with a message delivered in a dream. I never saw Selene again, though I returned to the Hollow Oak many times in the weeks that followed. Mickey noticed the change in me, the way I would sit at the bar scanning the room as if waiting for someone who never arrived. You seem different, he said one night, refilling my bourbon. Like you're carrying something heavy. Maybe I am. Want to talk about it? I considered telling him everything, the dreams, the transformed bar, the impossible journey to Brazil. But how do you explain to someone that you've discovered dreams might be more real than reality? That consciousness might be less solid than we think, that there might be people who can step between worlds as easily as walking from one room to another. Instead, I just shook my head and raised my glass in a silent toast to mysteries I couldn't solve and questions that might not have answers. But sometimes, late at night when the boundary between sleeping and waking grows thin, I think I can still smell jasmine and ocean salt. I can still hear the rhythm of waves on Copacabana Beach, and the distant sound of music that makes the heart beat differently. And I wonder if somewhere in the layers of reality we call dreams, there are other messages waiting to be delivered, other lives waiting to be saved. I wonder if Selene is still out there, finding people who can see clearly in both worlds, teaching them to carry messages between the layers of consciousness. I wonder if there are others like me, walking the borders between dreaming and waking, serving as bridges between what is and what might be. Most of all, I wonder about the nature of reality itself. If dreams can have consequences in the waking world, if consciousness can travel between layers of existence, if messages can be delivered across impossible distances through the medium of sleep, then what else is possible? What other mysteries hide in the spaces between what we think we know and what we're afraid to believe? The bourbon burns warm in my chest as I consider these questions, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I hear Selene's voice. Some people can step between the layers. Ethan, move between dreaming and waking, as walking from one room to another. Maybe that's what this is all about. Maybe the real journey isn't about saving lives or delivering messages or exposing trafficking rings. Maybe it's about learning that the boundaries we think define reality are more fluid than we imagine. Maybe it's about discovering that consciousness itself is bigger than the small box we try to squeeze it into. Or maybe I'm just a man who had a very vivid dream that happened to coincide with events halfway around the world. Maybe the human mind is so desperate for meaning that it will create elaborate stories to explain coincidences that are nothing more than the universe's way of reminding us how little we actually understand. But as I sit here in the hollow oak, sipping bourbon and watching the Chicago night press against the windows, I can't shake the feeling that I've been changed by something real. Something that reached across the layers of consciousness to touch me, to use me to show me that the world is far stranger and more wonderful than I ever dared imagine. And somewhere, in a city I've never visited, except in dreams, a child named Gabriel is safe. A trafficking ring has been exposed. Lives have been saved. Whether it was through dreams or coincidence, through messages delivered across impossible distances, or through the simple power of human intuition and determination, it happened, it was real. And that, perhaps, is the only truth that really matters.